Have you ever wondered what truly happens when an empath finally stops forgiving? Carl Jung uncovered a truth so unsettling that it shakes the very foundation of identity. Every mask begins to fall away. Masks that once covered others, and masks that concealed the self. The faces that appeared gentle and loving suddenly reveal manipulation. Relationships that seemed grounded in kindness are exposed as quiet exploitation. And perhaps the most devastating revelation of all, the empath realizes they themselves have been wearing the heaviest mask of all, the mask of endless forgiveness, a mask that has been slowly suffocating their soul. Imagine this moment. You've forgiven them yet again, the one who broke your trust, who twisted your kindness into weakness, who treated your empathy as if it were a bottomless well they could draw from without consequence. You smile. You whisper, "It's okay." You carry the weight of their guilt so they can rest peacefully at night, while you lie awake questioning your own worth, your own strength, your own right to feel hurt. But this time, something shifts. Instead of that familiar, hollow relief of keeping the peace, another feeling rises quietly, unexpectedly. Rage. Not the loud, destructive rage that burns everything in its path, but a deeper, sacred rage, the kind that signals a soul can no longer endure the same cycle. Jung described this breaking point as the collision with the shadow, the instant when all the suppressed emotions buried deep within surge into consciousness, demanding to be seen. For the empath, this collision is nothing short of transformative. And here is the part almost no one dares to speak about. That endless forgiveness was never pure compassion. It was what I call survival forgiveness, a trauma response disguised as virtue. Jung saw this pattern again and again in his work. He wrote, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." The empath forgives not from a place of strength, but from fear. Fear of being abandoned, fear of stirring conflict, fear of being labeled bad. From childhood, they learned that their worth depended on their ability to absorb pain silently, to sacrifice themselves in exchange for belonging. Jung named this phenomenon the sacrifice of the authentic self for the fragile promise of social acceptance. Yet, when the empath finally refuses to forgive endlessly, something revolutionary begins. The intricate social structure built upon their self-erasure starts to collapse. Masks fall, one by one, first from others, then from the empath themselves. And in this collapse, Jung pointed to his most radical insight: the shadow. The shadow is everything we deny within ourselves, everything we cast away and project onto others. For empaths, the shadow is not a curse, but a hidden gift. It contains the forgotten power of healthy selfishness, the fire of righteous anger, and the strength of sacred boundaries. Jung reminded us, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. And that is where the journey turns. For empaths, this darkness isn't evil. It is not a force of malice, but rather the forgotten core of their self-preservation. The instincts that whisper when something feels wrong, when someone is exploiting them, yet have long been silenced by the desperate need to appear good, kind, and endlessly forgiving. When empaths finally stop forgiving, they are not turning cruel or cold. What they are truly doing is integrating their shadow, reclaiming the fragments of themselves they abandoned in order to preserve relationships that were never built on genuine reciprocity. Can you imagine the power of taking back what was once surrendered? Jung identified clear psychological patterns that emerge when highly sensitive individuals reclaim their boundaries. These patterns, which I call the 8 signs of sacred rebellion, reveal a transformation that is as profound as it is liberating. And if you notice them awakening within yourself, you may be experiencing what Jung described as nothing less than the birth of authentic selfhood. Sign 1. The energy stops leaking. This first shift can be seen as an energy reversal. Instead of absorbing and carrying everyone else's emotional burdens as though they were your own, you begin asking a simple but life-changing question. Is this really mine to carry? Jung observed that individuation, the process of becoming fully oneself, always begins at the boundary between self and other. Slowly, you start to notice how utterly drained you feel after certain interactions. You begin to tell the difference between authentic remorse and manipulative guilt-tripping, a distinction that once felt blurred. Most importantly, you stop believing that you are responsible for regulating everyone else's emotions. Jung captured this turning point beautifully. Your vision becomes clear when you look into your heart. Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakens. And this is exactly what happens. The awakening empath finally dares to look inward, only to find how deeply depleted they have been. They begin, often for the first time, to trust their own intuition completely. And once that trust takes root, remarkable changes follow. Without a single word, others begin to sense this shift. The ones who once drained you, those subtle energy vampires, start to avoid you, almost instinctively, because you are no longer providing the endless supply they relied upon. Sign 2. The performance ends. Jung called this moment the death of the persona, the carefully constructed mask worn to secure acceptance. For empaths, this mask is the persona of being endlessly understanding, endlessly forgiving, endlessly available. But when the cycle of automatic forgiveness breaks, that mask becomes unbearable to wear. You no longer say, "It's fine," when it is not fine. You no longer make excuses for destructive behavior. You no longer provide emotional labor for those who never once returned the favor. This is what I call the end of emotional labor without reciprocity. Of course, Jung warned that removing the persona is not easy. It will feel terrifying. After all, the persona has always been your shield against rejection. Yet he reminded us, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. And becoming authentic inevitably means disappointing those who preferred the mask, those who depended on the performance. Sign 3. The manipulation becomes visible. This is where Jung's understanding of projection becomes crucial. When empaths stop automatically forgiving, they step out of what I call the empathy exploitation cycle. This shift is profound because suddenly, what was once invisible becomes painfully clear. Manipulation tactics that used to slip under the radar now stand in the light. You begin to recognize the charm of love bombing, those floods of excessive praise designed not to honor you, but to extract forgiveness. You spot guilt trips, so carefully disguised as vulnerability, yet carefully constructed to keep you compliant. You see, often for the first time, how your very compassion has been turned into a weapon against your boundaries. Jung wrote, "Everything unconscious is projected. The awakening empath no longer projects their own integrity onto others, assuming everyone else is as honest or as kind. Instead, they begin to see people not as they wish they could be, but exactly as they are. Sign 4. The guilt loses its power. Jung observed that much of what we call guilt is actually internalized shame, placed upon us by those who benefited from our compliance. When empaths stop forgiving reflexively, they develop what I call guilt immunity. This is not numbness, but clarity. You begin to see guilt for what it truly is, a control mechanism. You no longer feel guilty for having standards. You stop apologizing for boundaries that protect your peace, and you start to notice something. Those who try hardest to guilt you back into forgiveness are also those most invested in your self-abandonment. Jung described this turning point as the integration of healthy selfishness. It is not cruelty. It is the long-neglected instinct of self-preservation finally coming alive. Sign 5. The relationships sort themselves. Jung believed that authentic transformation always reshapes the way we connect. When empaths stop forgiving everyone unconditionally, what I call the great sorting begins. Relationships rooted in exploitation start to dissolve, while authentic ones grow deeper and more resilient. Some people will vanish from your life the moment you stop serving as their emotional dumping ground. Others will try to drag you back into your old role with guilt or pressure. Yet, a precious few will meet your boundaries with respect, showing up with the reciprocity you always longed for. Jung captured this dynamic perfectly. The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. But this transformation only happens when both people appear in their authentic selves. And once you begin standing in yours, others sense it instantly. They treat you differently, often before you even announce the change. Sign 6. The anger becomes sacred. Jung understood that anger, especially suppressed anger, is rarely just rage. It is wisdom, buried deep. When empaths stop forgiving, they uncover what I call sacred rage. This is not the destructive fury that seeks to harm, but the protective fire that finally says, no more. You feel anger about the past violations you minimized. You burn with frustration over boundaries you never allowed yourself to set. This anger is not poison, it is data. It is the psyche's urgent signal, showing you exactly where you abandoned yourself and where healing must begin. Jung wrote, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain." And indeed, the pain of seeing how you were treated becomes the very fire that forges your new boundaries. Sign 7. The pattern recognition activates. Jung's work on psychological types revealed that empaths often carry highly developed intuitive abilities. But when they stop forgiving automatically, something remarkable happens. What I call pattern recognition goes into overdrive. You start noticing the same manipulation tactics repeating across different people, almost like a script being played out over and over. You recognize the cycle clearly now. Transgression, followed by fake remorse, then a burst of love bombing, only to repeat itself again. The patterns are no longer hidden. You begin to identify emotional predators before they fully reveal themselves. This clarity is not paranoia, it is developed discernment. Jung referred to this as differentiated consciousness, the rare ability to see reality without being clouded by emotional fog. Sign 8. The self emerges. The final sign of this transformation is what Jung described as the encounter with the self. This is not the fragile ego or the carefully worn persona, but the integrated totality of who you truly are. When empaths stop forgiving reflexively, their authentic self begins to rise from beneath the masks. You start to uncover preferences and choices you never realized you had, because for so long you were consumed by accommodating others. You find your voice after years of silence. You realize, often with both relief and grief, that you have needs, desires, and boundaries every bit as valid as those of the people you once put above yourself. And if you recognize these transformation patterns within, write this truth on your heart: my break-in point became my breakthrough. Jung himself declared, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." For the empath who stops forgiving endlessly, this privilege is finally claimed. But Jung also warned against romanticizing this awakening. He called it the dark night of the soul, a crucible of transformation where old patterns must die before new ones can be born. For empaths, this often feels like a kind of social death, because so much of their identity was bound to being endlessly forgiving. Friends who only valued your compliance may drift away. Family members might accuse you of changing, of being unrecognizable, when in truth, you are only beginning to become yourself. And yes, guilt still lingers when you set boundaries that should have been in place years ago. Jung warned us with stark honesty. No tree, it is said, can grow to heaven unless its roots reach down to hell. The empath must journey downward, into their own psychological underworld, confronting the buried rage, grief, and pain they suppressed in order to survive. Only by facing this inner descent can they rise fully into authentic selfhood. And when empaths stop forgiving automatically, something extraordinary happens to the people around them. I call this the great unmasking. Suddenly, others can no longer hide behind the empath's endless understanding. The narcissist loses their shield of borrowed empathy. The manipulator can no longer twist compassion into compliance. The emotional vampire, once so comfortable feeding on endless forgiveness, finds the supply gone. Your clarity becomes their mirror, forcing them to reveal their true nature. Jung grasped this dynamic with sharp insight. Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. Yet he also understood another truth. Sometimes the irritation others feel toward you is not a mirror of their own reflection at all. Sometimes it is the sharp discomfort of your refusal to carry their shadow any longer. But the most shocking revelation comes when the empath's own mask finally falls. They see with unflinching honesty that endless forgiveness was, in its own way, a form of manipulation too. It was not pure selflessness, but a desperate strategy, a way of maintaining relationships through self-sacrifice, rather than through authentic connection. Jung called this the recognition of one's own shadow, and for the empath, that recognition can feel both unsettling and profoundly liberating. They must face the uncomfortable truth that much of their forgiveness was not born from love, but from fear. Fear of abandonment, fear of conflict, fear of being judged as bad. At first, this realization stings. How many times did they say, "I forgive you," when what they truly felt was terror of losing connection? But this recognition is not shameful. In fact, it is the very opposite. It is the key to freedom. For when you can see your own shadow clearly, you can finally begin to love, not from woundedness, but from wholeness. And with this clarity comes a powerful shift. You begin to give from choice rather than compulsion. Jung often distinguished between unconscious and conscious psychological processes, and this difference becomes striking here. When empaths stop the cycle of automatic forgiveness, they awaken what I call conscious forgiveness. This is forgiveness that serves the soul rather than the ego. Forgiveness that is rooted in truth rather than in fear. Conscious forgiveness doesn't arrive instantly after wrongdoing, nor does it bypass reality in the name of keeping the peace. Instead, it comes only after truth-telling, after boundaries are honored, and after natural consequences have been allowed to unfold. This kind of forgiveness is not about denying the wound, but about integrating it. It includes justice as part of its foundation, not as something ignored. Jung himself made this distinction clear. Forgiveness is not the suppression of a justifiable reaction. True forgiveness honors the wound while releasing the grudge. It sees clearly while choosing not to be consumed by resentment. In other words, forgiveness is not about erasing pain. It is about acknowledging it fully and still refusing to be trapped by it. Jung also reminded us that psychological energy obeys certain laws. When empaths stop leaking their energy through the reflex of automatic forgiveness, something extraordinary happens. That energy becomes available for something far more life-giving, what I call creative self-expression. For the first time, they have resources to invest in their own dreams, their own goals, their own healing. Instead of pouring themselves endlessly into other people's dramas, they begin creating their own stories. They start picking up abandoned interests, passions, and projects that once brought them joy but were set aside in order to be constantly available for everyone else's crisis. They begin to invest in relationships that energize rather than drain, connections that inspire rather than exhaust. And this, Jung insisted, is not selfishness. It is individuation. It is the natural unfolding of a human being into wholeness. It is the process of becoming complete, so that one can give to the world from a place of fullness, not from emptiness. Jung believed deeply that personal transformation always has ripple effects, shaping not only the individual, but the collective. When empaths stop forgiving automatically, they model a radically different way of existing. What I call the authenticity virus begins to spread. Your courage to set boundaries silently gives others permission to set theirs. Your refusal to enable dysfunction shines a harsh light on the systems that survive only through empathic compliance. Your willingness to express yourself authentically whispers to others. You don't have to perform in order to be loved. This is why such transformation often feels threatening to the people around you, because you are not only changing yourself, you are changing the very rules of engagement for everyone in your orbit. Jung's vision of individuation did not end with the individual. It included the capacity to form what he described as conscious relationships, connections between two whole people, rather than between two wounded halves desperately seeking completion. When empaths stop automatic forgiveness, something remarkable happens. They finally become available for this deeper level of connection. Instead of attracting relationships built on imbalance and silent suffering, they begin to draw in people who can meet their authenticity with authenticity of their own. Bonds form not from mutual wounding, but from mutual respect. Love flows not from emptiness or lack, but from abundance and overflow. And these conscious relationships are fundamentally different. They don't require endless cycles of forgiveness because they are built on honesty and clarity from the very beginning. Conflicts are no longer suppressed until they explode. Instead, they are addressed directly, with openness, before they turn into resentments. Jung's individuation process rests on integrating all aspects of the psyche, the light and the shadow, the masculine and the feminine, the conscious and the unconscious. For empaths, this means embracing not only their gift of compassion, but also their capacity for discernment. You learn, gradually but powerfully, to feel deeply without drowning in what isn't yours. You develop the ability to witness another person's pain without making it your personal responsibility to fix or carry it. This balance creates what I call compassionate detachment, the art of caring without carrying. And it is here, in this integration, that Jung saw the birth of psychological wholeness, the ability to respond to life from the full spectrum of your humanity instead of repeating wounded empathic patterns. Jung also understood that psychological development is inseparable from the spiritual dimension. When empaths stop forgiving automatically, they often encounter what I call sacred disillusionment. It is painful, yes, but necessary. The death of spiritual bypassing. You come to see that endless forgiveness was never true evolution. It was stagnation disguised as virtue. True spiritual growth demands something far more courageous, facing the shadow, setting boundaries, and honoring your own divine nature as fully as you honor that of others. Jung captured this beautifully. The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. And becoming your true self includes becoming someone who forgives consciously, loves authentically, and serves from a place of wholeness. Jung was also among the first to note the profound link between psychological development and physical health. For empaths, the shift is often visible not just in the mind, but in the body. When you stop absorbing everyone else's emotions, your body begins to heal from what I call energetic toxicity. Chronic fatigue starts to lift once you stop processing emotional waste that was never yours to hold. Anxiety softens when you're no longer hypervigilant about the moods of others. Even autoimmune issues often show improvement when you stop waging war against your own boundaries. Your nervous system, long overactivated, finally has permission to rest when it's no longer carrying the constant shock waves of other people's dysregulation. This calm is not an accident. It is the body's natural response to healthy psychological boundaries. Jung observed that individuation, when pursued with integrity, leads to what he described as the development of wisdom. Empaths who have learned the practice of conscious forgiveness often embody this truth in their lives. They become what I call wounded healers, people who can offer guidance, empathy, and support to others without losing themselves in the process. They can now see empathic wounding in others with clarity, without being swallowed by it, and without being triggered by it. You can offer guidance without carrying the crushing weight of responsibility for outcomes. Like a lighthouse standing firm on the shore, you provide illumination for those lost in the dark waters, but you do not chase after every drifting ship. This wisdom is not cold or distant. It is steady, grounded, and compassionate. It is warm, yet boundaried, caring, yet not carrying, loving, yet not losing yourself. Jung believed deeply that individual healing always contributes to collective healing. And when empaths finally learn the practice of conscious forgiveness, something profound takes place. They break generational patterns of empathic exploitation. What I call the cycle breaker effect begins to unfold. You begin to model healthy relationships for your children, showing them through your actions what true love and respect look like. You choose to no longer participate in family dysfunction, refusing to repeat the scripts of silence and sacrifice. You demonstrate to those around you that empathy does not require self-erasure. You become living proof that sensitive souls can be both soft and strong. And this legacy extends far beyond your immediate circle. Every boundary you set silently gives others permission to set theirs. Every time you choose conscious forgiveness over automatic forgiveness, you contribute to the wider fabric of collective healing. Jung loved paradoxes because he believed they revealed deeper truths. And here's the paradox of the empath's journey. When you stop forgiving everyone else automatically, you finally learn how to forgive yourself. When you stop absorbing everyone's guilt, you also release the shame you've been carrying within. You forgive yourself for staying too long in toxic situations that eroded your spirit. You forgive yourself for betraying your own boundaries in the desperate hope of being loved. You forgive yourself for mistaking trauma bonds for genuine connection. And this self-forgiveness, more than any other, becomes the deepest healing of all. Jung once wrote, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." For the empath who stops forgiving others automatically, this terrifying step becomes possible. They finally learn to forgive themselves, not for being human, but for forgetting their own divine worth. So here is what I want you to hold close. Your forgiveness is sacred. It was never meant to be handed out like candy to anyone who demands it. It is meant to be offered consciously, when the soul is ready, when truth has been spoken, when justice has been honored. Jung devoted his life to studying the process of becoming whole, and he found one truth echoed again and again. Wholeness always requires saying no to what diminishes you, so that you can finally say yes to what honors you. If you recognize yourself in these 8 signs, then know this: you are already on the path that Jung mapped out. Trust the process. Trust your anger. Trust your boundaries. Trust the truth that becoming who you really are is not selfish. It is necessary. And understand this: your refusal to forgive automatically does not make you hard. It makes you real. And the world desperately needs more real empaths. People who love from fullness, who serve from choice, and who forgive from wisdom. Because when an empath stops forgiving, every mask falls away. The masks others wore to manipulate your kindness. The masks you wore to avoid their anger. And in that sacred stripping away, something profoundly beautiful is revealed. Your authentic self. The discovery that you do not need to be perfect in order to be loved. You don't need to be endlessly understanding in order to be valuable. You don't need to carry the pain of everyone around you just to prove your worth. Jung's greatest gift to empaths is the clarity of this realization. He called it individuation, the process of becoming your truest self. And this becoming is not only your right, it is also your responsibility. A responsibility not just to yourself, but to a world that desperately needs conscious empaths, healers with clear boundaries, and people who can love from wholeness rather than from woundedness. Think about it. What happens to a society when more people refuse to equate sacrifice with love? What changes when compassion is no longer confused with compliance? The ripple effect is enormous. Individuation is not an isolated act. It is a spark that lights the path for others. By becoming fully who you are, you silently give others permission to do the same. If you want to dive even deeper into the empath's journey towards psychological sovereignty, I invite you to explore my extended work on what truly unfolds when an empath stops pleasing everyone and begins to see the truth. In that exploration, I reveal the full transformation, from constant people-pleasing and silent endurance to authentic empowerment and conscious choice. It is a shift that begins within but radiates outward, changing every relationship and every system you touch. Your journey from automatic forgiveness to deliberate. Conscious forgiveness is not just about personal healing. It is nothing less than revolutionary. To choose truth over performance, boundaries over exploitation, and authenticity over appeasement is to embody the very essence of Jung's vision of the awakened self. And Jung would indeed be proud. For each step you take in reclaiming your wholeness, you carry forward the timeless work he began. Thank you for walking this path with me. Until we meet again, see you in the next dimension.